every bubble, according to my theory, has basically two components: a trend in reality and a misconception relating to that trend. Here, the trend is credit expansion, which actually has been going on longer than 25 years. It's been going on ever since the end of the Second World War, the gradual reopening of financial markets. And if you look at the figures, credit has been growing at a multiple of the GNP. The rate varies from time to time, but it's been a multiple. So that's the underlying trend. But then, around 1980, a misconception came into play. And that misconception is what I call market fundamentalism. The belief that markets can correct their excesses and should be left to their own devices. And this misconception became the dominant creed, 1980, when Reagan was elected president. Margaret Thatcher was, I think, already prime minister in England, and that's when this market fundamentalism became the dominant creed. Now, since it's false, it generated financial crises, and we've had a number of financial crises since that time, in various segments and various parts of the world. And each time, the regulatory authorities or financial authorities intervened to prevent the system from collapsing or from the financial crisis affecting the real economy. And they were successful. And by being successful, they reinforced the trend, because the way they dealt with the crisis, it was to push credit expansion a further degree forward and reinforce the misconception. And that's how the bubble grew as big as it did. And if you look at the chart of relation between credit and GNP, you see that there really is an acceleration in credit growth since 1980. And as I say, the previous financial crises were tests of the misconception, successful tests. And that is actually characteristic of bubbles, that they grow faster when they are tested and the test is successfully passed. This was the case with the very first bubble that I analyzed, which was the conglomerate boom in early 1970s. So this crisis is different from the others because they were successful tests, and this is an unsuccessful test. Now, I thought, for instance, in 1997, that the authorities might not be able to hold the international financial system together, and so I thought that would be the turning point. I turned out to be wrong. They did hold it together. I had egg on my face, but it then made the bubble grow even bigger, as you now have experienced. Now, this market fundamentalism led to the globalization of financial markets, which was a market fundamentalist project, very useful to the owners of financial capital, because if financial capital is free to move around, it's very difficult for any one state to tax it or to regulate it. So this is very beneficial to financial capital. Deregulation, which of course was also very beneficial, and financial engineering, free opportunities to introduce new kinds of financial instruments and new products and so on. And that financial engineering was based on this false idea that deviations from equilibrium are random. And so all the risk management methods were built on this false conception, and all these synthetic instruments like CDOs were based on this false conception. Now, what happened with CDOs? These are mortgages sliced and diced and put together in a synthetic form. The idea was that by geographic distribution of the mortgages, you reduce the risk. The reality was that by separating the origination and servicing of mortgages from the ownership of mortgages, you actually created an additional risk. You might call it the agent principal problem, that the agent was not serving the interests of the principal, but just collecting fees. And that was the undoing of this particular crisis, first in the subprime, and then it spread. Now, the interesting thing is that once the subprime bubble burst, just like an atomic bomb, you have a small bomb that explodes the big one. The crisis spread from one market to another in incredible speed. And I don't want to go into the details, but it's, markets I didn't even know existed collapsed. Like auction-rated municipal bonds. They've been functioning there, and suddenly they ceased to function. And the real killer was when Lehman Brothers was allowed to fail. And that is what I didn't anticipate, because I really thought that the authorities would not allow the system to be endangered. And then the financial system actually melted down. It's no longer a fear, it actually happened. It suffered a temporary cardiac arrest. The money market funds, at least one of them, had Lehman commercial paper, could not, lost it broke the buck. There was a run on money market funds. The commercial paper, the money market funds were the main buyers of commercial paper. So the commercial paper market seized up. And the best corporations in America depend on the commercial paper market so they turned to the banks and drew down their credit lines. So the banks suddenly were flooded with demand, and the interbank market seized up. So LIBOR shot through and so that's when that's a relatively recent phenomenon, the effects of which are just now beginning to be felt.